Hello, just sharing some photos. Shot two rolls, Kodak Eastman XX 5222, and then a roll of FP4. Tried a new lens this week, the Voigtlander Heliar 50 f3.5. For some people, the look of this makes it a non-starter. I actually like the look of it. And then for many people, a 3.5 lens makes it a non-starter. But I'd seen some really impressive pictures with this thing, so I wanted to give it a chance. And I also really like the Zeiss sonar for f2 and 2.8, but then not really after 2.8. I mean, it's okay, but um, there are a lot of other 50s I like better stop down, and so I don't know, just wanted to try it. So this video is going to be, sharing some photos and then a little bit of just my commentary as I observe some of the lens characteristics. And then also this was my first time to use XTOL as a developer. Um, so just kind of interested in how that turned out. Um, I diluted XTOL 1:3, trying to make it a little more of an acutance developer. I wish I knew if it was acutance or acutance. I've always said acutance, but then I recently heard someone say acutance, and it kind of makes sense that that's how you would say it. Um, so, like an acute angle. So for this video, I'm going to call it acutance. All right, let's get going. This is Kodak XX, so are like the first handful of pictures. I'll tell you when we switch to FP4. Characteristic of this lens, this is wide open at 3.5. It's very sharp. You get a little bit of a swirl around the edges, just a subtle, right? Like if you look up here, right, the bokeh is just a little bit cat's eye. Gives it I don't think it's an overwhelming swirl. It's very gentle. And if I want to get rid of it, I just stop down to like F4, which it's a stepless aperture ring. So you just like, right. And there's a lot that's unique about the lens. It reminds me of shooting like an old Elmar, where you have to adjust, look at the front, make the adjustment to the aperture, and then refocus. You can kind of not do that if you like very carefully adjust the aperture ring slowly, and you can start to get to know where the stops are. But it's stepless, there's no clicks. And if you move it too quickly, then you've got to refocus. So there's a learning curve to using the lens, but it's also like really well made. And it's a joy to focus it, to turn the aperture ring. They're dampened perfectly. So overall, it's just kind of fun. I like this one, my wife, a lot. The 3.5. I think that background looks pretty cool. It's maybe 20 feet away. Yeah, the lens contribution here is nice. I like the photo of my wife too. Um, this one hasn't like blown me away yet, but it's each time I see it, it's growing on me. Probably because I know that I like this picture better. I like that my son's giving her a kiss and that she's smiling. And I like that I got his hand coming around the side. This is 3.5 again. And it's with double X, which does these Kodak, right? Tri-X and double X are both pretty good at getting lip skin separation there. Um, Here's my other son climbing like his brother. This is 3.5, and I like it. It has you can tell there's a little swirl effect in the background, but it's not at all overwhelming. If anything, it just kind of helps me know what aperture I used. Um, I don't think I knew yet that if I could just put it down to F4 that I could get it to not swirl. I don't even know that I would prefer it here. I think it looks good. What's interesting about this lens is that I wouldn't say it's super heavy vignetting, but it's there at 3.5, and um, which is kind of neat because a lot of my other lenses by 3.5 there's no vignetting, so it's kind of neat to have. I actually add vignetting to a lot of my photos, so to have it naturally there from the lens was nice. That was a good beer. Um, just like the shadow and the way the light was coming through the glass. This tablecloth is pretty cool. XTOL's it's definitely the grain is smaller than I'm used to with double X. And it's not as sharp as I'm used to, and that's not the lens, that's the developer. Um, Apparently you get a little bit of a speed boost using XTOL. It's definitely a solvency developer, but if you dilute it, you can get a little more acutance, which I'm not seeing a ton of. Overall, I like the developer, but um, I also ordered some FX2, which is a high acutance developer. It's not here yet; it's on the way, but I'll be excited to try that with double X. Oh, I like this picture. One, it's my son, so I love it, but I also like the baseball's personally significant. That was my baseball from when I was a kid, and I got lucky with the lighting on this one. I actually saw this cool lighting and brought my son into the picture. So I don't usually do that, but couldn't resist here. This one I have mixed feelings about because on one hand, it's like I like that, here's an 8-year-old boy who has two balls behind him and he's just sitting in the chair and what's it about? And it's an interesting expression. Is it is it tiredness? Is it silliness? Is he bored? Is he is he upset with his dad? He told me it was just being silly. Oh, I like that. I caught my boys checking the mail. I like that my son's feet are up off the ground, putting the key in, George watching intently. I also don't mind that this was a 3.5 shot. Right? I think it's the right amount of fall off in the background. Those are my two cats. Got three cats, two of them. They're also checking the mail, hoping to find a treat. Another one at f3.5. And my wife has good taste in tablecloths. Interesting patterns. This is my mother-in-law. We're on an orienteering trip. Her face is a little, a little more, a little grainy. I can see that not appealing to everybody. Um, I switched to FP4 here in a minute. I think those worked better in these full daylight kind of, um, right? Double X is a classic emulsion cinema film. It's not really meant to be examined as closely as a photograph would be, um, which kind of has a nice visual snappiness to it. Um, but when you kind of zoom in to look in on something like that, right, you can really see, especially just kind of how that was exposed and developed. But I like, that she's right by the Columbia. The sign just caught my attention a little bit. We were walking by it. My kids didn't want to wait for me. I made a quick decision. I don't love the picture, but um, made the cut. So we're doing the scavenger hunt, and we need to get across here to make it to the next thing. And my son's looking at this giant puddle of water, trying to figure out what we're gonna do. And he's looking at me quite confused. The out of focus background, like, it looks good. I will tell you what's annoying me though is I didn't scan this one well, and afterwards I put it in a sheet like an a negative holder, like archive preserve plastic thing. And then I needed to rescan it, and I took it out of that, and it scratched it all up. I feel like those things aren't really the best at preserving negatives. I feel like they just scratch negatives. Um, no, I really like this one. This was another one where I just saw some good lighting, and I was kind of hinted that my son should go over there. But at this point, he had lost track that I was taking his picture, and he was just focused on something. Right. And again, any unsharpness is really about the film. Oh, you know what? I switched to FP4 and I forgot to tell you. Where did I start at FP4? Right here. So this is the first shot that I switched to FP4. Yeah. Oh, so we're using this map trying to find these like places where you have to scan, right? It's like a 3 mile orienteering maze. So that's my mother-in-law and my son both looking at their maps. And then they both had this like realization of which way to go at the same time. But then they both are also rechecking the map. And their expressions are about the same. So I just like that little sequence I got there. I couldn't pick a favorite. I felt like really kind of needed all three. It goes boom, boom, boom. My kids have a hard time not being nuts in photos now. I wanted to see how those trees would look in the background. I think this is 3.5 again. Now my son George had it was his idea to do this one. He actually didn't know that this carved uh, Sasquatch was here. He just saw a grove of trees and said, "Dad, come take my picture." And he ran over there, and then this was there. My other son jumped on top of it. I want to try shooting more vertical. I fell behind them because I don't remember why, but um, I don't love this shot, but it was one where I intentionally underexposed to try to make the sidewalk pop a little bit. So keeping it more because it looked like what I was envisioning more so than it's a great photo or anything. I like the shadow cast by this little this shed. But by this point, my kids were getting tired of posing for their dad. I got a couple other in this sequence that were a little more like a family picture, but I liked the expression of my youngest son here. We went to the Lego store afterwards, and my mother-in-law was so tired she needed to sit while the kids played. Oh, getting a phone call. And then, oh, look at, yeah, this is George popped in front. I like the little exchange there between grandma. Just like, get me out of this place. I'm ready to go home. Now this is Goldie in the foreground, sniffing the grass. But I got Lewis in the background there, his tail poking out of the, well, he's headed into the bush. It's nice. Now we have this maple in our yard. It's a pretty tree. And then my wife was just working in the yard, so I was interested in trying to use that pretty maple. Here I'm showing my wife's massive biceps off a little bit. I like FP4, except I wish that with my wife in particular, her lips don't really darken enough, um, like they would if this was double X. This was actually like the sun was almost going down. Wasn't much light, and I'm shooting 3.5. So it was just a little bit of a challenge and it's a 100 speed film. So this was sort of my option, was to go for this type of exposure. I have this pretty spot in my house where the evening light comes in and my kids like to play. if you know any of my other photos, this I take a lot here, especially if I have like a roll I'm just trying to finish. It's a good way just to get a, take the last few frames. Now this is FP4 again. It's interesting that my son's lips do have nice tones compared to his skin. I test this lens. I have an SL2S where I can do a lot of the lens testing. But kind of over the course of these two rolls, yeah, I got the lens and then sort of started to figure some things out. So it looks like I might have, I wouldn't be surprised if this is F4 here. Okay. Really more for me here, just like gonna give myself like a minute to have some final thoughts. Um, I'm gonna try XTOL again. I made 5 liters of it. So, um, yeah, I find when I definitely made pretty thin negatives. I shot at box speed, or maybe I think double Exos maybe had my meter set to 400, and and then maybe like I don't know if I was 200 for FP4, and then um, I didn't, I kind of was slightly underdeveloped too, pretty thin negatives, so I could scan and then just have a lot of control over the contrast as I edited. Um, that has a lot of benefit when you're in varied scenes with different types of contrast, right? If I go with a push, a strong push, then my contrast is kind of set in, and then some scenes it can be too much. I can end up having a lot of contrast when maybe I don't want it. But in 9 times out of 10, I end up adding a lot of contrast. So I think my next batch, I'm gonna, I think I'm gonna shoot double X at probably 800 and try to use XTOL to do uh, an aggressive push and get contrast to your negatives and see what that looks like. And I definitely like the Heliar enough to keep it around. Um, this week I've also been shooting with the Voigtlander Lanthar Apo, um, the Zeiss Sonar, the Light Lens Lab, Elkin, and a Leica Summicron Rigid. And the Heliar's hanging in there with all of them. Um, from F4 on, it really, it's hard to tell the difference between it and the Lanthar. The Lanthar maybe has a little more color saturation and um, a little bit better contrast or flare control, but it is super hard to tell them apart. And then at 3.5, the Heliar really has a lot of vignetting and a little more of a swirly character, so you can definitely tell it apart from the Lanthar. But it's sort of cool to have that option at 3.5, and I really like the small size of the Heliar. I like that I can, um, right, it's under 200 grams. Um, I find it a joy to use, although it's a little annoying where I'm finding myself having to check the aperture by looking at it more than I would usually. Um, but I'm gonna keep giving it a chance, especially because I mentioned that I really like the Zeiss Sonar for f2 and 2.8. So, I think my current idea is to maybe to use those two lenses as a pair. Um, I don't know. And I shoot, right, I use these on digital, but I also use them on bodies, and right, I really value being able to look through the viewfinder and not have any obstruction from the lens. Um, and the small size and the shape of this lens really makes the viewfinder clear um, of any obstruction. So I can, that bottom right hand corner is wide open, so I can see what's there. And um, I really like that. That's part of the reason I'm not going to keep the Lanthar. But some of you guys aren't actually lens nerds, so I'm going to stop. Um, okay, maybe I'll see you next time. I gotta get better at stopping video.